Flight attendants and pilots, what NSFW things occur during your jobs. Story 1. Used to fly a small commuter plane, 19 passengers, with no door behind the cockpit, and also no flight attendant. It's really loud, so communicating is difficult, hand signals only kind of thing. Just took off on a 30-minute flight, and a passenger taps my shoulder, which startles the hell out of me because I can't see him approach, and I'm hand flying. Turns out he just needed to take a leak. Okay, no big deal, except we don't have a bathroom on the plane. We do have these gel packs to use though, so I hand him one and go back to flying the airplane. Again, no autopilot. The flight is full, and I'm not sure where I expected him to go, maybe back to his seat, but no. Instead, I look over to the other pilot, and only inches away from our face is this guy's long, wrinkly wank and hairy bush that probably hasn't been kept to in decades. As the guy is pissing into the gel pack, we hit some rough air, and urine is going everywhere at this point, on the avionics, both on our uniforms, and my bag. If that wasn't enough, the whole plane saw it. Once he's done, he hands me the gel pack like I'm supposed to do something with it? Oh no, buddy. I hand him some napkins and point to go back to his seat. Imagine if that plane were to crash and they started investigating what happened. So they start looking around the cockpit and find urine all over the effing place. It would be the mystery of the century, like how the urine gets on everything. Because peeing your pants when you're scared is one thing, and that's a totally different level. Or worse yet, they are lucky all of the spilled urine didn't short-circuit the cockpit controls and cause an accident to begin with. Story 2. Not totally on topic, but I fly a lot for work, and one time I walked to the bathrooms as a flight attendant was walking out. She saw me heading in right after her and said, "Be careful, there's a bomb in the bathroom." I think it was a nervous reference to her having just blown up the toilet, and she quickly realized what she said as I gave her a perplexed look walking into the bathroom. She pulled me aside as I walked out and apologized profusely, probably knowing that she'd have lost her job if someone less understanding had heard it. Story 3. I was a flight attendant for 6 years. Summer flights to party islands like Ibiza, Mallorca, and Mykonos could get quite raunchy, like women boarding in fishnets, wanking, and BJs at the back of the aircraft. And by fishnets, I don't mean just tights. I mean full-body fishnets, no bra, and the skimpiest thong you can imagine. Story 4. My wife and I bought last-minute tickets to a family event and could not get seats next to each other. So once we boarded, I convinced the guy sitting next to my wife to switch seats with me. Nice guy takes my assigned seat, which was next to a woman who was apparently suffering from the flu. 5 minutes after takeoff, she projectile vomits and tried to use a pillow to cover her mouth, which just made the vomit spray out sideways all over the poor guy. He just sits there for a moment, frozen, and he slowly turns back to look at me with this face and said, "You did this to me, and I will forever hate you for it." I offered to buy him a drink, but he ignored me, and it was a 6-hour flight. I think that guy was owed a little bit more than a drink for that kind of sacrifice, because can you imagine sitting on the plane for that long with no escape, and there is no way that vomit smell is going away? I'm a little surprised the recipient of the vomit turned down the drink offer, though, because if that happened to me, I would need all the drinks after that experience, and probably work the angle of getting a free flight or something too. Story 5. I used to work as a baggage boy, loading and unloading planes. And on our planes, we had to put the passenger's pet in a small area in the front belly compartment. We had an inbound flight that had quite a few pets on board, and when I opened the compartment door, I was hit with the most gut-wrenching dog crap smell. Once I was able to see through my watery eyes, I saw one large dog kennel pressed up against a small kennel. The idiots that loaded the plane put both the kennel's front gate ends together, so the larger dog must have pressed it behind up against and crapped through the gate because the little dog was covered in feces and in the corner quivering and whimpering. Trying to explain and apologize to the little dog's owner was one of the hardest things and, funniest things I've ever had to do. Story 6. I was on a flight to China, and one of the passengers up in business class decided to take advantage of the unlimited drinks he was offered before takeoff. He got plastered. When the plane started to take off, he decided to take a sleeping pill to tie him over for the 14-hour flight we were about to endure. Well, shortly after takeoff, the guy decided he needed to use the bathroom. So he ventures back to where the stalls are, but shoots past them. And he walks about 3 rows ahead of my row, whips out his member, and pisses all over the row and the people in it. They had to move the passengers, rip out the seats, and monitor the guy for the rest of the flight. Whatever happened to him, I have no idea. I'm just glad he didn't hold it in for 3 more rows. And it was at that moment that the airline realized that maybe serving unlimited drinks to passengers was a bad idea. I would like to believe that those passengers that got the golden shower were at least upgraded for the rest of the flight. At the very least, the airline needs to comp them for some free tickets in the future for over-serving this passenger. I wonder if on longer international flights they have some kind of holding area like a brig or something. I wonder where that passenger disappeared to. In the comments, anybody else experienced an unruly passenger like this before? Story 7. Not a pilot or flight attendant, and actually happened during a TSA screening. So after a weekend of EDC in Vegas, everyone is lined up to go home. Strike up a conversation with the girl in front of us, and she mentions how she had a surplus of party favors left over from said festival. She said she didn't know what to do with them and decided to take them before getting on the plane. The TSA takes one look at her eyes and tells her to lift up her shirt or something like that. I didn't quite get the gist of it. And she lifts up her entire shirt with a bra, flashing the TSA agent. And she was promptly escorted into secondary. 5 minutes before the plane was due to take off, she stumbles on the plane and finds a seat. Story 8. Survey pilot here. Sometimes when I'm flying back and forth for 5 hours straight, I need to piss in a bottle. And one of my coworkers had his slip out of the bottle while he was going full bore. And he pissed all over the instrument panel. You should have heard his desperation on the radio. And a couple weeks later, for our bi-monthly rotation, a new guy took his plane, and we didn't tell him that Greg pissed all over it like a moron. Story 9. I'm a co-pilot for a company that charters private jets. We had a customer who boarded with his bros and several beautiful women in revealing clothing. And in the air, we could hear a party going on in the back. Loud music, men laughing and cheering, girls giggling. And after a while, the door opens and someone taps me on the shoulder. So I look, and a completely naked woman casually asks me how much longer we have before landing. I tell her, we have a couple more hours to go, and she returns to the back. Was this guy named Dan Bilzerian by chance? I hope that pilot had some quality FAA training on how to stay focused on flying the plane with so many distractions going on in the back. And the woman probably just needs to know how much longer she has before she has to put her clothes back on. Clearly, she isn't very good at strip poker. Story 10. I am a test pilot for a small startup, and I landed a few weeks ago at a small airport in the middle of nowhere to empty my piss bottle and fill up my water bottle. My right-hand seat wanted to check out the helicopter that was there, so I went to use the bathroom, and he comes running to me. Turns out the 2 medics for the local medevac service were in the helicopter making love. We got to watch them both run naked from the helicopter to their training station. On the way out, over the radio, we got asked to never discuss what we saw. Story 11. Pilot here. That stuff mostly happens when we get to the hotel, wherever we are overnighting. Another guy that I shared a crash pad with in LGA said that he used to bang a flight attendant in one of the bunks when he went over the Atlantic. We both agreed it was awesome, but very dumb. Fireable offense. There's lots of stories like that, but they are all kind of boring after a while. Story 12. Obligatory not me, but a friend of mine disclaimer here. I have a female friend who flies transatlantic as a flight attendant. She told me a story of how one of the passengers had been in the bathroom for at least 15 minutes. So being a busy flight, people were pissed off and complained to her that he had been in there for such a long time. So she went to the door, knocked a couple times, and no response. Obviously being concerned for the passenger's safety, the doors were opened, and inside was a guy on the toilet, trousers around the ankles, headphones in his phone with an adult film playing, and his junk in hand. This man fell asleep while whacking it in an airplane toilet. Embarrassment ensued. Yeah, sounds like he's succumbed to the sleepy drone of the airplane engine, or perhaps got that post-finishing sleepiness at the same time. And as embarrassing as that was, hopefully he wasn't watching something really weird like eels or something. Yes, I said eels. People in the comments, and let's be honest, who has done this on a plane, with the exception of the falling asleep part? Story 13. Just a plane passenger, but this happened on my last flight. So about halfway through, the pilot comes over the intercom and says, "Please come out of the bathroom. Smoking in an airplane is illegal." Naturally, this gets the whole plane on edge. And turns out it was an old woman who was completely naked and vaping in the bathroom while refusing to come out. They eventually had to break into the bathroom and take her out, which then caused the woman to try and fight the flight attendants. She was arrested as soon as we landed. Story 14. Not a pilot of FA, but I fly between 100 and 150 flights a year. So one time I was flying out of a small Midwest airport to Dallas. I roll up to the airport restaurant/bar to get a bite and a drink before takeoff. I notice this lady sitting by herself at the bar, and a gentleman approaches her. They seem to be hitting it off, flirting, laughing, etc. Time comes to board the plane, and since this was on Southwest Airlines, it was pick your own seat. So naturally, they sit next to each other, and I am a few rows behind them. Flirting leads to touching and then kissing, and you can see that hands are wandering everywhere. Now, by this point, I'm not the only casual observer because about 3 or 4 other guys are looking and laughing, and we all bond over their public display. Now, it escalates to a point where she gets up to go to the bathroom, and about 30 to 40 seconds later, he follows, because apparently they thought that that was enough time to be inconspicuous. As he approaches the bathroom she's already in, a flight attendant stands up in front of him and says, "No, back to your seat." She knocks on the door and then tells the lady to get back to her seat. And all the observers are laughing at this point. The flight continues, and she is practically mounted on him, doing everything they could possibly do while keeping their clothes on. And this continues until we land and deplane. She quickly hurries off the plane, and he is a few steps behind her, but it seems to be in a hurry. The other observers and I are talking about it and laughing as we exit the secure area into the baggage claim area. And then we see her, still several steps ahead of the guy, and she runs into the arms of her boyfriend and starts kissing him. Her flight guy just stops dead in his tracks, takes a couple seconds to observe, and then just leaves. I haven't laughed so hard in public with people that I had never met prior to or since. Yeah, ouch. The pain is real. That poor guy on the plane first, and then additionally, I feel so bad for the boyfriend that he has no idea that this has happened and no witnesses on the plane have the heart to tell him. Just a crappy situation all around because this chick is playing both of these guys for fools. I bet the guy who met her at the bar was so excited to potentially get her number and keep in touch, and maybe some more sparks could fly. Story 15. Not an attendant or a pilot, but one time on a flight to Hawaii, my mom was sitting behind me and next to this guy who's setting off weird vibes. My mom was next to the window, sleeping, when she felt a lot of action going on next to her. Looks at her seatmate, and he's furiously jerking off under a thin blanket that shows everything. Stares right at her like the scene from We Need to Talk About Kevin. My mom clams up and didn't tell me or the flight attendant that this is happening, which was kind of stupid in hindsight, because I was awake watching a movie in front of her, never knowing what was going on. Story 16. About 15 years ago, when I was in my final year at 6th form, a girl and I hit it off on a school trip to Hawaii. And on the flight back to London, we sat next to each other. She proceeded to jerk me off. I was next to the window, and she was in the middle. My teacher was the outer seat. I feel absolutely terrible about it now, my poor teacher, but at 17, that was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I'm counting it as the Mile High Club. Story 17. Obligatory not a flight attendant disclaimer. I was a ground handler, but there was a flight attendant that came through our station regularly who once discovered a man who had stripped down to absolutely nothing and was whacking it and attempting to ejaculate onto the sleeping woman next to him, who was a stranger. This was on a small aircraft, and they were sitting in the back row, which is how he managed to get naked without being caught. Story 18. I used to work as a flight attendant a couple years ago. This one time we were working a flight home, and I see this guy and a woman hitting it off on the flight. The guy was buying this lady drink after drink and really flirting with her. I really didn't think anything of it until one of my colleagues pointed out that the guy's family is sat towards the back of the plane while he was sat towards the front. So when we landed, we watched as the awkwardness ensued. He said goodbye to the lady he was flirting with while he stood there and waited for his wife and 2 kids to come walking down the back of the plane. I'm pretty certain his wife realized this as she gave him the dirtiest look. The other woman looked really confused too as she left wondering why he was waiting around. We were there trying so hard to keep a straight face. Well, that guy isn't winning any Husband of the Year awards anytime soon, and I don't want to rush to any judgments without all the facts, but that sounds like some straight-up dirtbag behavior. Really, dude? With your wife and kids on the plane too? Not a very classy move. That must have been an awkward car ride home from the airport. Story 19. Not a plane, but other relevant transportation. So I grew up with parents that lived 3,000 miles away from each other. Twice in my early teens, I took a Greyhound bus from one side of the country to the other to live with the alternate parent. On the last one, I kind of fell in line with 2 other younger people that had also just met, a girl in her late teens and a guy in his early 20s. We formed a bit of a camaraderie. We all sat in the back of the bus, those two right behind me, and we talked and joked for hours. The girl was kind of cute, but I was probably about 3 or 4 years younger than her, which is a big gap when you're a teenager. Both of them seem so worldly. So night falls, and the bus gets quiet, the lights go out, and most people have either fallen asleep or are reading quietly with their overhead lights. I wake up from the sleeping and begin to notice a distinct smell. It's the smell that young teenage boys know all too well. That sweaty, warm must of fresh jizz. Usually following an afternoon FAP session. I look between the seats back to my newfound friends and see the girl rodeo-pounding the guy beneath a large blanket. She didn't notice me looking, but as my curious eyes looked into the disgusting splendor, I glanced up to see the dude creepily looking at me with a nasty grin and a slow nod. I didn't talk to them for the rest of the trip, not out of shame or disgust, but I was a young teenager still, raised in a more sheltered than usual home environment. And this incident, for some reason, made me feel so far away from home, so out in the world now. In reality, I was a 14-year-old kid, halfway across the United States, alone, 1,500 miles away from anyone he knew, let alone someone of authority. Maybe other kids would have just sat there and wide-eyed and gawking with raging boners, but oddly enough, this just felt like a metaphorical rung on the ladder of becoming an adult. This is a pretty interesting story and a growing up moment for sure for this kid. I mean, a memory like that isn't going to be forgotten probably for his entire life and might have shaped a lot of things regarding his sexual growth and maturity. Probably a fair statement to make also that this story is not the strangest or NSFW thing to happen on a Greyhound bus. In the comments, anybody have some crazy stories about riding a bus across country?